وخير الخلق قدوتنا تعال وزر وشاركنا وقم بالخير سابقنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أما بعد. Before we begin, let me note that we are going over this book in the order of the book as students of ilm do. Some may have studied Tahara or the early chapters of the book, but it's always recommended to go over it again and again. Going over the book formally and completely is the method of Tullab al-Ilm. And you always learn something new, or at least you refresh your memory. If we complete this course, inshallah ta'ala, anyone who fully studies this course and understands and comprehends it and asks when things are not clear will be able to stand on his feet in the science bi'idhnillah ta'ala and attain knowledge directly from the mother books of the various madhahib of fiqh. Like, for example, in the Hanafi madhab, al-ikhtiyar li ta'lil al-mukhtar, or in al-Maliki madhab, al-sharh al-saghir, or the Shafi'i madhab, tuhfat al-muhtaj, or the Hanabila's books, al-iqna' or al-tanqih or al-mughni, or references before that or after that. Of course, that's for those who know Arabic. Those weak in Arabic should touch up so that they can use it to excel in this knowledge. In the university level, I was in the Sharia section, which is the fiqh section. It centers around this topic. Everything is taught, but this topic is the main focus. You're taught the foundation. In fact, I may go over more than what was originally taught in the fiqh curriculum there. In the university, or here, you're given the foundation. Then you're expected to dwell with the reference books to excel. And it's your research after that that makes one alim, or one can recline back as a lazy failure, as most of the graduates end up doing today. One needs patience and persistence because the start is not what interests many. Many would think it's obvious chapters, they know it all, and skip over it. For example, some sisters may be eager to wanting to get into the chapter on marriage or talaq or khula, and some brothers are interested in the book on hudud. A talib ilm takes it all with patience and persistence. That's one point. The second point is pertaining to memorizing the matan or the mutun based what I received of questions. We stress the importance of memorizing mutun. And it's actually draining because living in the West affects the fluent Arabic tongues who speak their language. So imagine when it's not one's mother tongue language. The more practical way is to memorize one matan in each madhab, of course. Or memorize one, like this one, as a basis for all the madhab. Yes, it's a Hanbali madhab matan, but with the proper explanation, it may suffice as a basis for all the madhab, as we'll attempt to do with our explanation, inshallah ta'ala. But one thing is that if you haven't finished the Quran in memorization, you need to start with that. Put the memorization of this aside for now. Understand and learn this with us, and you can memorize this in the future, but use your time to memorize the Quran, as that is much more important. We don't have talabat ilm who don't memorize the Quran. In the future, you can come back to memorizing this matan or a similar Hanbali matan. If you memorize any Hanbali matan, you'll be able to take what I explained and fit it under that matan, just as it fits under this matan here. And most likely, any summarized matan from the other various madhahib as well, inshallah. You can always come back and memorize this. Memorizing is time consuming and it should be focused on Quran for those who do not have the Quran memorized. You want to be among those who are told recite and ascend as you recited in the dunya, because your rank is determined by the last verse that you recited. Now the book here, he starts with the 10 major points or index that I called an index. Chapter 1 of the main heading is worships, ibadah. And he gave 5 subheadings, 5 matters that need to be addressed. Salah, zakah, Sawm, Hajj, Jihad. The first of those subheadings is Salah. And he broke that down into 7 matters. And you should follow the book closely to avoid getting lost. Or you can do what I used to do is when I studied similar books, I used to draw a sketch or a diagram with boxes and arrows and then circles and more arrows, because the book branches off. This entire book can be put into a diagram. But more essential is that you draw a diagram for what you've learned, that specific class, either before class or after class. That helps follow the outline method, and it helps one focus better, and it helps one concentrate better as well. So now let's start with Salah. He said, Madarul fiqh ala 10 ashya. The spheres of fiqh are 10. And we translated them in the last halaqah. We didn't go over them in detail for a reason, because each one is a chapter. We'll go over each one in detail, inshallah, in its own chapter. Al-awwalu fil ibadat, he said. The first of the spheres of fiqh is worships. And he breaks that down into 5 categories. وَهِيَ خَمْسَةٌ الصَّلَاةُ وَالزَّكَاةُ وَالصَّوْمُ وَالْحَجُّ وَالْجِهَادُ. The acts of worship are 5. الصَّلَاةُ وَالزَّكَاةُ وَالصَّوْمُ وَالْحَجُّ وَالْجِهَادُ. He broke down the major heading into 5 subheadings. الأول منها الصلاة. The first of those subheadings under the major heading of worships is Salah. الأول منها الصلاة وتشتمل أمورها على 7 أشياء. Prayer consists of 7 matters. It's clear why he chose Salah to be the first, because it's the connection between a servant and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the forgiveness of the sins. It's the brightness to the face, and a brightness in the grave, and a brightness yawm al-qiyamah. It's a sign of Iman, and it's the covenant that distinguishes between a Muslim and a kafir. And its importance is signified in that it's among the last advice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave on his deathbed. الأول منها الصلاة وتشتمل أمورها على 7 أشياء. Salah contains 7 matters, meaning everything pertaining to Salah is included within these 7 matters. Ulama went through Salah and deduced and extracted the aspects of Salah to place them under these 7 categories. There's no hadith that says Salah is built on these 7 matters. So where did the ulama get this from? As just like what we mentioned when we mentioned the main index of this entire matan, we said it's an outline. Ulama deduced to make things easier to understand and memorize and teach and learn. What are the 7 matters of Salah? Shartun, wa ruknun, wa wajibun, wa sunnatun, wa mubahun, wa makruhun, wa muharramun. شرط وركن وواجب وسنة ومباح ومكروه ومحرم. You can say these with a dhammatain or a kasratain. Both are linguistically correct. مباح or مباح. مكروه or مكروه. محرم or محرم. And he said shart. Shart is conditions, prerequisites. Rukun is a pillar. Wajib is a requirement or obligation. Sunnah is a recommendation. Mubah is what's neither forbidden nor recommended, permissible act. Makruh is detested or disliked. Muharram is prohibited. We'll go over these. We're not going over them in detail right now because we'll go over these matters, inshallah, in more detail when he breaks them down further in the outline. So he mentions them generally, then breaks them down. الأول الشروط وهي ستة. الأول الشروط وهي ستة. الأول منها الطهارة من الحدث. الطهارة من الحدث. So first is a shart. Shart is a condition, a prerequisite. It's mentioned first because matters under this are matters that are to be done or initiated prior to the matter which is the ibadah of salah, the worship of salah here. How they came to figure out what makes a shart is something that's studied in usul al-fiqh. That's why I defined what usul al-fiqh is in the intro. A shart is a prerequisite for our concern here. It's required before the commencement of the matter, which is here as-salah. It's a prerequisite in order for the salah to be valid. Shart is a condition. And it's something outside of the ibadah, precedes the ibadah, and continues throughout the ibadah all the way to the end. And you will understand that statement with an example. Covering the awrah. That's considered a shart. It's not an actual part of the salah in the sense that everyone is covering their awrah here, and they're not even in salah. You can't in any part of the salah uncover the awrah. So it starts before the salah and continues throughout the entire salah all the way to the end. It's not like ruku'. Ruku' is a short act of the salah, which is classified differently. It's not under shurut. We'll get to that inshallah. You do ruku', then you move on to the next step. With covering the awrah, it's needed all throughout the entire salah before the salah starts, right before the salah starts. Likewise, wudu. That's also a shart. It's not a direct part of the internal acts of the salah. Because everyone's on wudu right now, we're not in salah. However, it must be maintained all throughout salah. And you can't begin your salah without it. Unlike sujood. Sujood is classified differently. It's not a shart. You do sujood as a short part of the salah, you move on to another act. And exactly like wudu, in covering the awrah is facing the qibla. Starts before the salah, continues throughout, you must face the qibla all throughout. And a small, simple note on shart and rukun and wajib. We'll get to each of them individually, inshallah, in the proper spot. But a common denominator for now, common denominator among them is you must do them. You get sinned if you purposely leave them out. If you forget or not, we'll deal with that when we explain each one on its own. But the common denominator is that you get sinned if you don't do them. If you don't purposely do them. The author said, الأول الشروط وهي ستة. الأول منها الطهارة من الحدث. The shurut, the prerequisites, the conditions are 6. They're actually really 9. He skipped 3. The reason he skipped 3 is most likely because they're obvious or common or known, or because they're considered conditions for all the other ibadat, while the 6 are specific for the conditions of salah here. And that's why he didn't mention them. What are the ones he skipped? The first one is al-Islam. One must be a Muslim, because ibadah is not accepted from a kafir. And then aql, must be sane and conscious. The third one is tamyiz. He must be at the age of comprehension, which we'll get into inshallah. He didn't mention them because they're common and popular and known. Why isn't purification accepted from, for example, the 3, a kafir or an insane or a toddler? They have in common that they can't establish the niyyah. A kafir's niyyah is rejected. Insane can't attain a niyyah. Young child under the age of tamyiz, he can't comprehend the niyyah. There's a small exception pertaining to that in the ibadah of the wealth, according to Malikiyyah. and Ash-Shafi'iyya and Hanabila and Ata and Mujahid and Ibn Sirin, they said zakah of the wealth must be taken from the wealth of even a small baby or someone insane, which we'll elaborate later on under zakah. But the exception should be noted here. Why? Because we said those three are prerequisites for all ibadat. So we must hint to the exception. How does a child or someone insane have wealth? A family member died and left an inheritance which somebody has a custody of. Or someone left him a charity to live off for the rest of his life. There's also an exemption on Hajj. Hajj is exempted from those three matters because it's accepted from a mumayyiz, which is less than the age of comprehension. The parent or guardian makes the niyyah for themselves and on the behalf of the young baby or infant. Because of the hadith that's in Sahih Muslim, a woman lifted up her child and said, "O Messenger of Allah, would this child be given credit for performing the Hajj?" The Messenger said, "Yes, and you will get the reward." He would, of course, the baby would have to do the Hajj, another Hajj, after the age of puberty and after taklif, but his parents and he get the reward. The author, rahimahullah, said, "Al-awwalu ash-shurutu wa hiya sittatun." الأول منها الطهارة من الحدث. الأول منها الطهارة من الحدث. The first of the 6 conditions is purifications. Purification. Purification from ritual impurities. Hadath is impurity. It deprives a mukallaf of anything that requires tahara. If you're familiar with other mutun or books of fiqh, nearly most of them mention a chapter on purification before salah. Majority or most of them. So they'll say chapter on purification, then comes the chapter on the salah. The author here included that under salah. That's within the discretion of the ulama. They could start with purification because it's a prerequisite to perform in salah. Or they could start with salah and put the first prerequisite under that, under the shurut, to be purification. The proof on tahara is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. The Quran, the ayah, everyone knows in Surah Al-Ma'idah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين وإن كنتم جنبا فاطهروا وإن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط أو لامستم النساء فلم تجدوا ماء فتيمموا صعيدا طيبا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم منه. O believers, when you stand up for salah, wash your faces and your hands up to the elbows. Wipe your heads and wash your feet to the ankles. The verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah and the hadith on that is in Sahih Bukhari. لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. Allah does not accept the salah of any of you when they're defiled until you perform ablution. The author, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, الأول الشروط وهي ستة. الأول الشروط وهي ستة. الأول منها الطهارة من الحدث. الطهارة من الحدث. Tahara is ritual bathing, ghusl, wudu, or sometimes when that's replaced by tayammum, dry ablution. Purification is 2 types. Tahara from hadath, which is being defiled, or tahara from najas, which is impurity. Right now we're talking about tahara from the hadath. Hadath is what makes one defiled and obligates wudu upon him to do the ibadah of salah. Hadath here includes both the major and the minor hadath. It includes the major and minor hadath. The minor impurity is everything that necessitates a wudu. Not ghusl, wudu. Passing gas, or urinating, or defecation. Those require wudu. The major impurity is what requires and entails ghusl, like purification from menstruation and postpartum bleeding or sexual intercourse. The author rahimahullah ta'ala said, وَلَا بُدَّ فِيهِ مِنْ ثَلَاثَةِ أُمُورٍ وَلَا بُدَّ فِيهِ مِنْ ثَلَاثَةِ أُمُورٍ مُتَطَهِّرٌ وَمُتَطَهَّرٌ بِهِ وَطَهَارَةٌ وَنَاقِضٌ وَلَا بُدَّ فِيهِ مِنْ ثَلَاثَةِ أُمُورٍ. The prerequisites of purification encompasses three matters. These are the pillars of purification. These are the pillars of purification. Mutatahhir, the one who performs the purification. Mutatahharun bihi, the substance used for purification. Wa tahara, the purification in itself. Wa naqid, the nullifier of purification. The first three are pretty much clear, and we'll go over them in detail, inshallah. He mentions the outline, like I said, then he gets specific. The last term might be a bit confusing because he's mentioning the three prerequisites of purification: the performer of the purification, the substance, the purification itself. Then he mentions a fourth one, which is a nullifier. How does that nullifier fit in with the rest of these three prerequisites? He says, naqidun, to do a nullifier of wudu. What he means is that in order to perform purification, there must have had been something to nullify the purification. The more proper term that he could have used to avoid confusion was mutatahharun minhu. Mutatahharun minhu, a cause of purification, which could be urination, passing gas, or anything of that sort. So he said the prerequisites are three, but he mentioned four. Could be an error, or maybe he didn't consider the naqid to be among the three. Then he began to go into some details. He starts general, he gets into some details. Now the details are on the performer of the purification. Me and you who are performing the purification. أما المتطهر فهو المكلف الخالي عن مانع حسي أو شرعي. أما المتطهر فهو المكلف. The specifications of the one performing the purification. المكلف, every competent person above the age of puberty. الخالي عن مانع حسي أو شرعي, who is not prevented by a tangible factor or a legitimate impediment. As to the performer of purification, he said he must be a mukallaf. Mukallaf means someone over the age of puberty. Mukallaf is an adult that's accountable above the age of puberty. Accountable in dunya, in sharia, if there was a khilafah, and accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he dies past that age. Adult and sane person who's obligated to perform the ordains and refrain from the haram, and who will be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. The author used the term mukallaf. That may not be such an accurate term here. Requiring that the one performing the purification must be a mukallaf means an insane person can't do an acceptable purification, which is correct. An insane person is not accountable and he can't do purification. But it also means a child, mumayyiz, can't perform purification, which entails that his salah is not accepted because he can't do purification, an acceptable purification. What's a mumayyiz? It's a child under the age of taklif. A child who's not an accountable adult, but someone younger, but is able to comprehend and distinguish between matters, which is generally around the age of 7, all the way until the age of puberty. When he hits the age of puberty, he'll then be referred to as a mukallaf. So when the author specifies only a mukallaf's purification is accepted, that leaves out a mumayyiz, which is a young boy who can't comprehend. who can't actually comprehend, and who the Messenger ﷺ recommended we teach them salah, and part of salah is purification. عَلِّمُوا الصَّبِيَّ الصَّلَاةِ لِسَبْعِ سِنِينَ. Teach a boy salah, prayer, when he reaches the age of 7. When the author put the condition of mukallaf, it means the purification of a mumayyiz is not accepted. When in fact the Messenger ﷺ ordered us to teach them and ordered them to pray at that age of 7, which of course entails making wudu. Either the term was incorrect and should have been replaced with a mumayyiz, or the author may have went along with the Maliki madhab, who include a mumayyiz under a mukallaf. They say a mumayyiz is not obligated to do the salah, but in such context, he's included under the term of a mukallaf, and his wudu is accepted. The vast majority of ulama do not refer to anyone below the age of puberty as a mukallaf. They refer to him as a mumayyiz. The third explanation is that he may have used that term in the context of purification that is considered an obligation. It's an obligation on only a mukallaf. And salah or its purification is not obligated on a mumayyiz. Meaning, he didn't mention it in the context of a recommendation, which would include a young boy. He's talking about what's an obligation. And it's not an obligation on a mumayyiz, it's only an obligation on one who is a mukallaf. Mukallaf means an adult, sane, Muslim, all those factors. Let's go to the next sentence. أما المتطهر فهو المكلف الخالي عن مانع حسي أو شرعي. The performer of the purification is every adult, accountable, competent person in full possession of his faculties. Mukallaf, who's free from tangible factors or legitimate impediments. So the next sentence is الخالي عن مانع حسي أو شرعي, who's free from tangible factors or legal impediments. The person performing the purification must be khali عن مانع حسي, free from tangible factors. Tangible factors here could include a wide variety of matters and encompass many issues. Hissi, the term hissi means tangible. What he means over here, it's like barriers that stop the water from reaching the flesh, that one has to wash off as part of a ghusl or a wudu. For example, nail polish or paint that's over the hands or arms or anywhere that is supposed to be washed for wudu or ghusl. Or, the mud that painters use to patch the walls. Sometimes that sticks to the skin and acts as a barrier, and it needs to be removed. Like the dough or the glue and anything that deprives water from touching the skin. One must free himself of those tangible factors. And a note on this is that one must attempt to remove as much as he can as possible. Sometimes there's a type of glue one can't remove. It's impossible to remove it and it stays for days. If one did all they can with their trying to attempt to remove it, then it's permissible because of the fiqh rule, hardships in such matters bring ease. Hardships brings ease. And it's all taken from the verse, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا يريد الله أن يخفف عنكم وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج, in verses that pertain to that matter. Ibn Aqil said a tiny speck under the nail will render the wudu invalid. So there's a tiny thing that's depriving what's under the nail to be wet, then it will render the wudu invalid. However, Ibn Taymiyyah and Al-Mardawi, they had a different opinion. They adopted that something minor under nails even if it deprives the water from touching that little tiny area, does not invalidate the wudu, because it's something widespread and common and known, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wouldn't delay teaching a matter widespread and common to the people. Ibn Taymiyyah added that like what sticks under the nails is similar to minor blood or dough that may stick on the hand, very minor. So there's room for like tiny dots for painters who wash, and they end up seeing a tiny small dot or two of paint. According to Ibn Taymiyyah, there's some leverage in that. The author then says, Al-khali an mani'in hissi aw shar'i. The performer of the purification must be free from legitimate shar'i impediments. What are the shar'i? We took this hissi ones. What are the shar'i impediments here? It means like something like kufr. Because if a kafir says, I made my wudu, it's not accepted. That's a shar'i impediment. Mani' shar'i. Niyyah. If he just washed himself just for purpose of cleanliness, without the niyyah of tahara, a mani' shar'i. Similar to that is a woman who takes a shower while she's on her menstrual cycle or postpartum bleeding. If a woman takes a shower in that status and she cleans herself, it's not a shar'i purification, because being on the menstrual cycle or nifas, that bleeding is a mani' shar'i. It's an impediment. A final note, and a final side note, even though wudu does not remove the major impurity in such matters, because they need ghusl, it does lessen it. Ghusl lessens the major impurity. How? It was the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was junub, that he would make wudu before he ate or went to sleep. It doesn't remove the janaba, but it lessens it for both a man and a woman, according to the correct opinion. We finished the performer of purification, and the next is the substance used for purification, which we'll take inshallah in the next halaqah. I don't want to make this too long so these matters can sink in. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.